Hello and welcome to today's remote session. This is Tom Bechtold, your host from SecureWorld Digital. Up next, we're talking about GRC reporting, how and why you should improve yours. Now, this is obviously a topic we need to understand a little bit better, and I've invited a panel of folks here that are going to answer my questions. They're going to take your questions as well. So if you've got some burning questions out there you need some answers for, please throw those in the either the attendee chat or in the Q&A box that you hopefully see there. I want to say thank you to the folks over at Anecdotes for making our discussion possible today. We want to keep this as engaging as possible. So if there's stuff that you guys are thinking about, even if it's not a question, just maybe a scenario that you want to kind of just throw out there, your colleagues will respond in that attendee chat. So let's just keep it all, nice and polite, but, feel free to dialogue in there, ask each other questions, certainly ask us questions. Real quick, housekeeping, we've got the slides today. If you're looking for slides that have meat and substance to them, these aren't those. These are just some fillers that I've got in there, and somebody's playing with the slides. Sorry, these slides you can have if you're looking for the proof of attendance thing. These are great for that. So there's a PDF of those. I've got a couple of good blog posts in there from the folks over at Anecdotes, and two really solid research PDFs that you're going to want to grab in there too. Talking, of course, about GRC. So grab that stuff, good things in the resources. If you're having any audio or video issues, hit F5 or function F5. That fixes most of the challenges that we see in today's environment. This is being recorded, so if you have just continuous problems or maybe you're using kind of a weird browser, I don't know what that means, but they told me to say that. If you're using one of those off-branded browsers, On24 is very much into Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Edge. If you're using something outside of that, I'm recording all of these. So these sit on our website for the next 6 months. You can always come back and visit that. And the beauty of that also is in case you have colleagues that are trying to get their arms around GRC, maybe they're having some sleepless nights over this stuff, you can share that link with them. That same link that you use today will bring them to this same recorded presentation. So please share this information if you found value in it. Okay, GRC, we've got a lot of ground to cover. I usually give some kind of anecdotal stuff here. We've got a ton of questions. I'm not kidding. I've got like 15 questions for the group. We're not going to get to all of them. We might even run over the hour. We'll find out. But keep your questions coming too, because I prefer to use the audience questions over the ones that I came up with, because we want answers for you guys, not for me. So keep that in mind. So throw out some questions. That being said, who do we got here? We've got three experts that I've invited. Christopher Doyle, he is a security and GRC guy, head of GRC platform. His company is confidential right now. We're not going to bug him about that. So he's in stealth mode, we'll say. But welcome, Chris. If you wouldn't mind, give us a quick. If you have a crowning achievement that you'd love to kind of toot your own horn about, I love hearing about this stuff because I want to hear about you. I can read your bio and cure insomnia with that. I'm kidding, of course. You have a very good bio, but give me your crowning achievement from your perspective, personal or professional, and then what is your big concern as we're talking about today with GRC?
Yeah, well, my crowning achievement is being here with you today, Tom. Now, my second crowning achievement, of course, is actually just last month, we were using Anecdotes, and I was able to hit 83% automation of the compliance controls, which it's a big number for us. It saves a lot of time, a lot of energy, and makes for great reporting. So it was a lot of time savers. Really top-notch stuff there. Now, as far as
that's a big number for anybody, man. 83%.
I want 100%. I'm going to do my best. Everyone says it's hard to do. I'm going to keep going though. But there is one thing that has been on my mind, and it's something I think we'll talk about, which is risk management across the org. It's something we all talk about. It's hard to define. There's so many different ways to do it. But I think risk management really does weave through the entire organization, all teams, all people. And I think effective ways to communicate that and get that across the org is something that's really weighing on my mind.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Joshua Spring, he is our Senior Product Security and Compliance Analyst over at Snowflake. Same question, Josh, if you wouldn't mind. What is your crowning achievement and what's keeping you up at night about GRC?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Tom. So from an achievement perspective, I was very fortunate to be able to work on a common control framework that is basically the glue that holds all of our requirements from different disparate frameworks together and then put them into a GRC tool so that we can now use that relationship between the different frameworks. So very cool. I love that. It was a very fun and neat project to be a part of. Now, things that do concern me is the agility at which we can keep the frameworks updated within GRC tooling, particularly things like IRAP, which we all know to be highly dynamic, and things like FedRAMP, which can make large sweeping changes all at once, or sometimes slow incremental changes. So how do we stay current? That's what concerns me and keeps me up at night.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Casey Wood, Security and Compliance Lead, Healthcare and Life Sciences over at Google Cloud. Crowning achievement, and what's keeping you up at night with GRC?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thanks for having me, and just lucky to be here and humbled by my co-presenters and the ability to speak. Crowning achievement, I am a big believer in standardization. I think like a lot of folks in this audience, back in the early days of like natural language pair matching prior to AI model development, I was looking at what we always think of as like a contract as a last line of defense from a GRC perspective. But when you look at it, there's actually a binary lens to it. And so I crawled the public domain of like every terms of service you could probably imagine in the SaaS and PaaS and IaaS space, and then was able to create a model that extracted NIST values from them. And so what I learned was that 70% of the time we're going to the table to do any type of business-to-business relationship, we're talking the same language. And so it was disruptive in the sense of we could get to focusing on the 30% differential that much faster. And so I just am a huge believer since then in what type of automation or a new efficiency we can bring to the initial continuous and evaluation of products and services to expand our business. So what keeps me up at night, I think we all are acting in too much of a reactive position. Audit at the end of the day is a 12 to 18 month cycle looking backwards. And so I want to help not only my institution, but other organizations move more towards a proactive and real-time data-driven approach to if we see something wrong, recording the right forensic information and taking insight to action in order to reduce overall risk exposure and mitigate the risk that we are currently faced with instead of waiting until 18 months looking backwards. So we all can do a lot more in the face of the risk we're facing. So
appreciate that. Valid concerns across the board from all three of our panelists, I think. Anything out there in the audience? What are you guys thinking about? What's keeping you up at night with GRC other than like, it's a long audit process. I know that. I know it takes some folks a week to get ready for just collecting all the data or more, just to get ready for the auditors to even come in. So lots of stuff there, a lot of headaches, I'm sure. And then, of course, you got the fear of AI stealing your jobs. I'm kidding. We'll touch on AI in a little bit. But let's get into some questions. First ones I've got here. Let's see here. I will start with, I can still see Casey on my screen. So I'm going to start with Casey on this one. But I want to hear from everybody. What's the challenge with GRC reporting today? That's what we're here to talk about, right? So give me one of the challenges that's really like, you're just like, good God. I mean, you kind of mentioned some of them in the beginning, but give me one that you're like, this is one that we really got to fix for people.
Yeah, I think that the word I'll bring here is context. So I think many times GRC is looked at as a necessary evil or to do the bare minimum to comply, when in reality we're not capitalizing on the contextual value of information in a blameless postmortem culture. And so the reason I share that is because it's not about if something goes wrong, it's when it goes wrong. Do we have enough information to protect ourselves better tomorrow than we were protected today? And I think many times when you look at GRC reporting, it's doing the bare minimum just to satisfy or check the box, rather than actually investing in the value of the data associated with what went wrong, not necessarily about who did it, but what was the chain of events and the context that led to such an exposure, without having to point fingers. And I think many times reporting is on this, it's lean, but it's not mean. It's too lean. So you may have just enough information to satisfy what is expected of you, but not enough information to actually protect you tomorrow. And so I think we need to start really it starts with ourselves. In those moments, what additional information could we have that should be readily available and searchable in order for us to not only take action to mitigate risk overall to get as quickly and effectively as possible, but to further improve our controls tomorrow. And that's something that starts with each of us as a GRC professional. And it's a tough question to ask because we all are doing too much and have too little resource, but we need to ask that question each and every day. So.
Appreciate that. Thank you, sir. Anything different that you might add, Josh?
No, I tend to agree. And I think that on top of that, like when we talk about reporting as a function of risk or reporting as a function of threat detection or incident response, it's interesting that we can use data from GRC, which is oftentimes very retroactive and in response to things, like not proactive, right? So we can use that reporting data to sometimes eventually get ahead of those. We can notice trends. We can say what one of our functions isn't performing as well as it should, because the results of that is always going to come out in audits, or at least always should come out in audits. Now, we all know that audits are what they are, and then sometimes going into it, you can have a certain preconceived notion of what's going to happen as a result. But once you're in the actual audit, many things can go wrong, go askew, go sideways, right? So the GRC reporting aspect of that would be what, in addition to the root cause, like what can we do for the next iteration? What on the next run, how can we avoid this potential situation where we're having to go back and defend a decision that was made several months ago when the results of that reporting could be, let's get ahead of that. And now when that decision's made on the next iteration, we're making an informed decision.
Appreciate that. I'm going to switch it up on Chris. Chris, I want similar, but both of the guys talked about bringing up collecting data. So what are the key challenges organizations face when they're collecting and organized data for these GRC reports, and how can you overcome these? What do you think? You might be.
So actually, I've seen a few things. So oftentimes, one of the things that comes up for me is when you're collecting the data is, especially when you're around different product lines that have different maturity levels, and especially if you do acquisitions, a lot of times compliance kind of bends to the culture, whether it's a team or a company, and being able to harmonize all of those inputs and outputs into, like gentlemen were saying, reporting features. How do you harmonize all of that for everyone so you can actually make sense of it, so you can actually use it, so you can actually scale it across the org so everybody moves up at the same time with you? In my opinion, I mean, GRC itself, like I said, oftentimes it is a real-time thing, but we often worry about it once a year, but it can drive actionable insights. And I think that's so key that we need to build that into the 365. So that's what I think we should be doing with it.
Okay. Since you brought it up, give me a couple of these actionable insights that you're discovering that you're now unlocking, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that everyone always relates to is security awareness training. It's one of those things where, yeah, it's a very minimal thing to do. You can do it much better, but just to pass the bar is so minimum. But are you getting your people in out of 30 days? And being able to check to see who's running that. Maybe HR is running it, maybe security is running it. Which team is running it? Are they updating them? Are they passing automatically? Are they redoing it? Because when you have automated compliance, it'll call it out immediately when someone deviates or drifts by one day. They didn't get it in by that day. Their overview, and then the auditors catch that very quickly. And so for me, that it seems like such a low bar, but every organization, whether you're small or large, has to do these types of things to stay compliant. And it's good data hygiene and it's good posture. So for me, those are the types of things, just getting the bar raised for the things that you can control, because there's so many unknowns in GRC. So you try to get your hands around what you can control and then deal with what's coming in with the unknowns.
Yeah, I think like GRC as in general is really like how you up-level your programs from a simple monitoring mechanism to a management of your risk, your compliance posture, your security state, and the configuration of your individual components that make up your security posture, right? So I think that's where GRC really shines, is going from that, I understand there's problems in my environment, to here are the problems in my environment, and here's ultimately how we might solve them.
Interesting. Okay, let me ask you this, because you've mentioned, we've got different groups that we need to work with. You've got these auditors that are coming in. How can GRC reporting be tailored to different audiences? Whether it's senior management, technical teams, these auditors coming in, maybe the board. I'll throw that one out. Anybody can grab this one, but I want to hear from at least a couple of you.
So I can take first. Oh,
yeah,
no, Joshua, go ahead. Okay.
I was just going to say you needed. You did it twice. No,
sorry,
in this case,
I'll pick. Chris, I think I heard you loudest, so you start. Casey, you follow. Sorry.
I'll keep it brief. I had spent my time at a dashboarding company, and being able to deliver that dashboard and reporting custom, I don't want to think, or tailored to that team is important. If you're talking to finance, maybe they want to see dollar values. What's it actually going to take to fix it? If you're dealing with technical teams, maybe they want to see types of grades. And if you're dealing with legal, what's the level of compliance? Is it 100% of what we say we do? Where are their deviations? So I think that really knowing who your stakeholders are and actually collaborating with them and saying, hey, how do you in your department do things? Maybe we can tailor the report a little bit so you're understanding where your controls are beyond. Did you get it? Did you not get it? And take that level so they can work with it into their own sprints and their own project management going forward.
Excellent. Casey, how about you?
Just building on that. So couldn't agree more. I mean, I think while it might be a utopian view, we need to get everyone speaking the same language. And assuming whether it's the smallest organization to the largest, there's going to be a board of advisors that are responsible for the financial solvency of the company. That are in charge of its vision, whether it's public or private. And if we can start communicating to one another as if that was flowing all the way through to the board, then you start opening up a concentric feedback loop that can go up and down, right? So whether you're a bottoms-up organization or a top-down, the messaging is consistent, coherent, and you have the opportunity to continue to evolve on that message to make sure it's more comprehensive. I think as I thought about this, GRC is about many things, but if you put it in the 3 lines of defense model, GRC sits in the second line purposefully, right? You're a bridge. And so if you're bridging the gap between the operators and ultimately the auditors, you have to make sure that the message, and this is a huge, I think, turning point for the industry or for the function, which is we also have to make sure that these are flowing through to business values. So how can we get GRC functions to translate or underscore the critical business go-to-market functions? Yes, making sure there's a dollar value into what it will cost, or opportunity cost, or if there is a dollar value to the overall enterprise risk that you're taking on. We talked about these as like large figures, but there's never been a number to it. And I think, especially with the disruption in the cyber liability space, there's going to have to be a more finite touch point on the dollar value and impact to the business. So making sure that it's in plain language, having some type of empirical metric data associated with its impact, and then tying it to a relevant business need is the 3 critical minimum parts of communication. So.
Appreciate that. You make it sound so easy that way. Honestly, I mean, it's like, just communicate. I mean, that's basically, at the end of the day, that's what we got to do. We got to just talk to one another. It's like the easiest thing ever, but we make it hard.
We make it hard. And I think one tool that I've found to be really effective is if, I guess my team and what I've found, especially in my standards work to be really effective, is if you take a domain and subdomain based approach, you start defining owners beyond the control owners themselves. And you can, functional units of your business can join together based off of control objective goals. Control objectives lead up to a domain owner, and that domain owner is responsible for reporting up. And so if you can create a natural hierarchy and put those, Lego blocks together, it's amazing, like the shared ownership and pride folks will have in the initial structure you build. And so everyone can see where their Lego piece, adds to the initial structure, and then they can all have joint ownership and pride in what it creates. And I think that's a vehicle that could be, that is worth communicating through, for all better terms.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, it looks like we've gotten some audience questions in here, so I want to sprinkle some of these in as we go through. Okay, that one, Stephen, that's a tough one. What does successful governance look like? I feel like we could talk about that for the whole hour, but we'll touch on that in a little bit. He does have another question though. What other functions should or shouldn't fall under the GRC program? Risk, TPRM, BCDR, security awareness, data governance. What do you guys think about that? Are there certain functions that maybe shouldn't be in this GRC program, like we've talked about?
I
Anybody
think
can grab
all of
that.
those functions are informed by the GRC, like sort of output. One of the outputs is the input for each one of those programs to an extent. For instance, let's take a look at risk. Like typically when we talk about risk, we identify a risk, we identify, in some cases we quantify that risk, how much of an impact it's going to have, and then we identify mitigation strategies. And oftentimes we'll implement a compensating control as that mitigation strategy. So understanding what is the operational state of that control is certainly informative to your risk function. Same thing with TPRM. If we have certain requirements that we expect out of our vendors, then the GRC tooling is the output reporting into that TPRM program of, yes, our vendors are meeting the contractual obligations that we've established under service level agreements, or they're not, or maybe there's some gray area in between. So I think that the output of GRC is the input for a lot of these programs, and I don't necessarily see the need to divorce them from each other because they are certainly related.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Anybody want to add anything there? Otherwise, I'll move on. Excellent.
I could say.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it also depends on the size of the company, right? If you earlier startups, everything has to fall under someone's domain. And if someone doesn't, who's going to take what function? And I think sometimes who's going to grab it ends up building it into the program. If you're in the GRC, you take too much under your wing. But as you mature, there's a lot of things like for example, like IT operations, things like that should be split out. Things that, in my opinion, going back on like the 3 lines of defense, you shouldn't be checking your own work. So really it's, if you're going to check, well, like I said, everyone informs, as I just said, but you really shouldn't be doing your own work that you're going to then recheck it, that the auditor is going to say, well, who checked your work? Well, you're the author, the reviewer, and you did everything. And so it's good governance to keep a lot of stuff separate, as long as, if you keep collaborating and you have enough people out there, I think you can have a really small team and really make an outsized impact even in a large org.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Let me see what else I have here. I think I'm going to save a couple of these. One more quickly. DoD has a new CMCC framework. Thoughts on how this addresses I can't read today. Thoughts on how this addresses new government framework. Anybody have any feedback on that, the CMCC framework?
I think there's a lot to say in this space. Sure, yeah. Starting off with, if we're talking about general strategies on how to adopt a framework, it's never a wrong idea, in my mind, to go procure a consultant that's an expert in that space. They'll be able to walk you through it. They'll know the regulation. They'll know what is required of you as an organization and what are certain things that you might be able to not put as much attention or time or money into. So certainly a consultant is really helpful there. It's also possible that maybe there's an internal resource that is your internal expert on that. That's also very possible. But generally speaking, if it's regardless of what framework you're trying to adhere to, I think of the standard process of understanding where you are versus that standard, a gap assessment is always very helpful. Then a remediation phase to bring your current offerings up to that level, or at least closing the holes. And then doing some kind of audit to validate it before you get into your official audit, like usually, again, some kind of modified gap assessment or modified engagement. That way you're taking a holistic approach to it. You do the crawl, walk, run phase, and you're not just, playing whack-a-mole with the requirements. You're actually having an intentional, deliberate process you're going through to attain that certification or accreditation.
Thank you for that. I'm going to shift gears. I had some fun making the slides, by the way, using AI. So my disclaimer. So I had some fun here. Governance is supposed to be your friend. And if you couldn't tell this was AI, shame on you, because it's all misspelled. It wasn't a hacker. Okay, I like this first question because it kind of goes back to almost with that framework one we just touched on. But given what you know, I'll start with Chris on this one. If you had to go back to square one, what is something you wish you knew that as you took that first step on that journey? I want to get an answer from each of you on this one. So we'll do this one briefly. But Chris, what do you wish you'd known when you first got into creating this program?
Yeah, I sometimes, depending on the org you're at, GRC, security, things like that, they have a bad rep. And I have found that it's actually not really that true. You spend a little time, engineers, developers, marketing, anywhere you go, people actually do care about these things more than just, oh, we need it for a checkbox. No, they actually, you talk to people, you pull them aside, and they are very engaged with you when it comes to security and governance, risk and compliance. They just sometimes need that decoding, because sometimes it's just so garbled when you read these things. If you're not used to reading controls and you're not used to reading the requirements and the frameworks, it just makes no sense. And it's just like anything could be in scope. So I have found that taking the time, having meetings, and in fact, when I had a meeting, people would ask to be invited to come to the meeting, which I think is the greatest compliment. People want to come and learn. And if you make it in a very safe, very secure way, no one's at fault here, and people are just learning, I have really found that people just rush to it. So be open, be transparent, and invite everybody, and I think they'll come for you.
I'm curious if bacon and donuts were involved, and that's why they wanted to come to that meeting, or was it no snacks?
It was all virtual. It was all virtual. So virtual donuts. That's what we give you.
No, that's awesome. I love that. I love that. Josh, starting from square one, what would you recommend folks start doing?
Man, that is a huge question.
It really is. It is.
I would say I wish what I'd spend a little bit more time on before going down this journey is truly understanding what our requirements for that tooling would be before I started assessing each individual tool out there in the market. Now, I wasn't able to, look at every single solution that was out there. I was only able to look at, a small number of them. But if I had a better understanding of exactly what our requirements are or were ahead of time, then I probably would have saved myself quite a bit of heartache down the road, especially during the implementation phase. So for me, this is probably not true of every organization, but for me, I wish I had done a much better job of gathering the requirements ahead of time.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Casey, same question. Then we'll move on.
So along that lines, I'm gonna pivot. So Josh, I completely agree. When it comes to the criticality of gathering the appropriate minimum viable requirements in context of your intention of use. I'm going to speak to the analysis paralysis side of things that I think plagues all of us, which is how to find the right balance. Because I think when trying to define those minimum viable requirements and trying to combat or target solving a problem for scale, it's really easy to get caught in this realm of, do I have too much? Do I have too few? And there's such a fine line between too little and too much. And it can get confusing and then ultimately disrupt our ability to effectively apply controls, because either we have made too robust of minimum requirements where we're signing off on everything as a compensating control, or there's a tragedy of the commons that takes place where it's like, oh, there's only 17 minimum requirements for the DoD CMCC framework to be at there's 3 layers to that maturity assessment, and okay, we have 27, so we're all set. But in reality, like putting it into terms, it's, well, where does 27 put you on track to the 110 that are required to hit the next bar maturity, and then ultimately to get down, which is just for DFARS, which is contractual compliance check, but then to actually be an expert level and proactively apply those controls and effectively, you're at a totally different level of risk analysis. And so I think what I wish I would have known sooner was having reassurance in the 2 words that constantly play in my mind to keep me sane, which is reasonable and appropriate. If we start having folks look at, from an assessment perspective, what are we doing from a reasonable and appropriate lens to apply the expected controls in this gray space? What are they? And then what is the regular cadence that I'm going to continuously evaluate and check to make sure that my initial analysis is valid and functioning as expected? And so that way, I think you're never assuming that what you're doing is going to be perfect going to market. It's you're doubling down on your confidence of your ability to continuously monitor and take insight to action to improve your posture. And so focus on the continuous monitoring part rather than what's that perfect starting point, because that's what's going to pay off audit-wise in the end, and performance-wise from a GRC perspective. So.
Thank you for that. Let's get into, I brought up AI on accident, but it's sort of a happy accident. I mean, it's everybody's favorite marketing term right now. But seriously, though, I mean, you can use AI and automation to kind of alleviate a lot of these headaches. So I want to talk about that for a minute. Um, with rapid adoption of AI technology, what should people be looking at GRC solutions as they automate some of these processes for people? There's a ton out there. So how do you know what you're looking at? What are some of the things that people need to, I guess, questions to ask as they're evaluating some of this stuff? As Josh mentioned, he was evaluating all kinds of stuff. So what are some of the questions or things that people need to look at? Because everybody and their brother is saying something about AI now. Whether it's true or not, we don't know, but until you dig in. So with these automated GRC solutions, what are some of the concerns that people need to worry about here? And obviously, I know what the benefits are. We'll get into those in a bit. But let's start with Casey on that one. Casey, talk to me about automation.
So I'm a hot take of the day that I think we're gonna see some nodding is there is no such thing as auto remediation, and I hear that pitched a lot. Remediation with a capital R is a very high barrier to cross, and candidly, getting back to that last point, there is no ideal state of perfection, and everything relies on context. So removing that. Many times we hear that assumption that with these tools comes the ability to auto remediate. I think should be watered down a bit, and that's okay. We should be moving more towards auto mitigation or initial mitigation, right? It's still proactive. It's still reducing the life cycle between identification of risk and ultimately taking mitigation action. But it should be about reducing that half-life, not about getting to remediation with a capital R. I would argue that's it's never fully done because things are moving too fast and your operation is constantly changing, and your full picture won't come until 18 months looking backwards, and it's going to be a completely different environment. From the evaluation perspective, I think there's three things, and our organization champions these 3Ds, which is secure and compliant by design, by default, and throughout deployment. So from what you can do is from an evaluation perspective, you should be going for that design bar, and it should be point in time, threat model driven, risk analysis driven. From a default perspective, you want to reduce the half-life into improving between defaults of continuously adding or augmenting your controls to provide more ample protection for a wider amount of use cases. And then throughout deployment is how are we reducing half-life between insight to action when it comes to mitigating risks based off of enriched data that is showing us common patterns of misuse or exposure. And it's like those are ultimately the three ways I would segment how to look at evaluation of tools. I don't think one tool in itself does it across the board. You need to have a focus on what function it's trying to perform, and then make sure there's pull through, whether it's to the left or to the right or all the way through from a linear progression from where you have this concentric circle of, okay, we have our design state, we are moving to a better default state, and then we're continuously monitoring throughout deployment, and then we're not leaving it and checking the box there. We're going to continuously monitor and push the bar. So that's how I would look at it in those three functions.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Chris, I want to get your input on this, but I want to kind of put a different spin to it, if you don't mind. As you're looking at these different solutions, what are the things or what are the risks associated with AI as we're talking about trying to automate some of these functions? What do you think about that?
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is, get ISO 42001 because that's coming out right now. Management of AI frameworks. So let's call it what it is. It's brand new, but it's always good to have a starting place. So for me, that's a great thing. But even that, one of the things I've always argued about was, are you sourcing? Are you sending all your stuff out? I mean, this GRC, the AI doesn't exist in the middle of nowhere. It exists somewhere. Where does it exist? You're sending your data out to. I'm not going to name names, but you're sending it out to somewhere, wherever it might be, because there's so many popular ones. There's that other option where you can run your own, on your own on-prem or in your own clusters. And so to me, that's really important to understand. Even your internal AI functions, maybe you want to have them running internally, so you don't run even the risk that you're going to get breached later on. Breaches happen; it happens. And the same thing also for all those other companies, because what are they doing? Are they also just reusing it to, your favorite provider, your AI provider? So for me, I mean, there's just so much data privacy and security risks that could happen. So the question is, do the pros outweigh the cons? It's a very generic answer in that respect, but you don't know. You didn't train the model. You have no idea what it's trained on. It's going to start hallucinating, and so find the AI, see how good the RAG processes are, and ultimately really consider training on your own GRC work, which is something that we've done, and I think you're going to get a lot of value out of that.
Thank you for that. Josh, anything to add before we move on?
Yeah, sure, certainly. And AI is a cutting edge technology. It's obviously not brand new. It's been around for some time. We've talked about it for decades now, but we're really getting to the point where it's being more and more useful and prevalent, right? So I think that we certainly have the risks to data governance, like like Chris talked about, and then we also have specific use cases we need to keep in mind, like Casey talked about. So I think the way that we use AI is our greatest risk. We certainly don't want to have an information spillage event because we've trained our AI on certain, restricted information that we don't want leaving our organization. Totally hear that and agree. I think that the way that AI should be utilized is in a way that I'm going to reach back to my military time here and call it a force multiplier. It should be enhancing the existing capabilities of your team already, and it shouldn't do a replacement function. Because if you're what I mean by that is it's not going to take the place of an actual developer. It shouldn't. You need that human intervention at some level. But if you can use AI to extend what's the term I'm looking for? Like the productivity of an individual or the efficiency or perhaps even like the accuracy of an individual's work, I think that's a net win. And you should absolutely consider those data governance considerations, but also don't be afraid to push the boundary. Don't be afraid to innovate in this space because it is cutting edge. And we are just now getting to the point where it's usable prolifically so long as we're doing it the correct way. And yes, I would encourage everyone to go look at ISO 42001.
Definitely. Shifting gears, another one of my fun AI images here. Why should GRC, let's start with Casey, I feel like you need a question right now. Why should GRC be a critical business objective and revenue driver? Tell me about that.
So a couple of things. I mean, at the end of the day, regardless of which segment of business you're in, your ability to stand by the compliance and the security of your product is critical to the brand, period. So while it's been an internal function and a necessary evil, for lack of better terms, I know I've said that before, it's actually now becoming one of the outward marketed aspects of any offering you create. At the end of the day, every institution or organization has a critical asset of data. They have to be responsible stewards of that information, and there's open pathways and more ways to, utilize, or let's just use GDPR. They did it the best, right? But to utilize, transform, transform, transcribe, the four magic T's from a verb perspective. But in reality, your ability to not just deliver a sound product, but verify and validate and make it transparently accessible is critical to your success, as well as your end user's ability to continuously evaluate the effectiveness of what you have to offer. And if you can't provide that, they won't get past their auditors or their downstream contractual liability. And so I can't stress this enough. It's not just a matter of if you comply or if you say you comply, you have. Don't just trust us. Don't just take our word for it. Pressure test it and validate it. So I think we're going to see a huge growth in the number of bug bounty programs and open source initiatives where institutions are incentivizing and gamifying GRC's prevalence in its offering, because you can't get away with just signing off or setting a third-party attestation that you participated in an audit. People want to see the results.
Thank you for that. Let's see, Chris, do you see a world in which GRC can not be called, or the people that are associated with that, not be called a cost center? Because I'm frankly tired of people being called cost centers. You hear that about cybersecurity, you hear about IT, you hear about the compliance department. How do we shift this mindset? Like Casey said, it's like this necessary evil or whatever, but everybody's just trying to do their jobs, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you shift this?
Well, I think the first shift is finding the middle ground first, which is making it a value center. If you are really have a strong GRC program, I can tell you that you should be finding technically vulnerabilities. You should be finding cost savings. You know, that person that left the company, are their VMs still running? Like little things like this, these little costs. It's not, you're not making something, you're not selling something, but you are cleaning up the things that people may not be paying attention to when people leave, when people move, joiners. Those good processes can lead to uncovering savings that are just being not paid attention to. But there is a possibility we like to shift everything, right? Shift everything to the beginning. And we want to move everything over with to the revenue side and the GTM side. You know, one of the ways I would do that is, let's say you have your SOC 2 and your ISO. You can use it to open up new hunting grounds. For example, if you have your SOC 2 and your ISO, you can do a fast track and text ramp. Now you just opened up all state governments for your GTM teams in the central region. Or if you have 27001, you can go get TISAX for the German car manufacturing, or DORA, which is coming out in January 2025. You know, if you have 27001 and your 22301, you're already working your way there. So you're able to open up new markets effectively that you wouldn't otherwise be able to if you have that automation, or if even if you just have cross-map controls. You can see how far in. It's almost like having an automated gap analysis when you're automated. You can see what you need to pick up to go to the next level or the next region or the next area you want to operate in. And that can drive revenue right there. In my opinion, that's how it worked for me, at least.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Checking the time. Okay, we're kind of getting. Oh, go ahead. I have a new question, but go ahead.
I've got just one more thing to add. Chris really well said there. You know, I think we have to change the perspective a little bit, and we need to. It's a point of investment for an institution. We talk about moving to a reactive to proactive position. Cost center aside, if you are an organization that's just acting based off of what audit or internal audit returns to you, or waiting for the next regulatory writ to come in from the outside, you're a sitting duck. It's really, how can you empower your organization based off the telemetry data you have at your fingertips, based off of your user patterns and the product you have to offer, which you should know better. You should know your own backyard better than anyone else. Then how are you turning that insight into a competing advantage, right? If you're not moving towards a more offensive approach to security and compliance, using your governance, risk, and compliance footprint, you're not using the information that's at your fingertips that you are paying to store, maintain, and protect. And so, you know, I can't stress this enough that it should be looked at as like an R&D approach, or of a reinvestment of dollars, where you're moving the culture of your institution to waiting to be attacked to thwarting the next big one, because that's what's going to build your brand, the trustworthiness, the credibility, the authority you have in the marketplace faster than anything else. And it takes time, but it's a valuable investment, and it's going to enrich your overall services. So,
yeah, I agree, but I think there's one area that we didn't really talk about where there's some value delivery, and that's scalability. GRC tools allow you to scale your team so that more or less people are doing more with the tools that they have on hand. If you think back, like, what would be the traditional method is managing these things in spreadsheets, and you've got 15 different people with their hands on this spreadsheet. That is a nightmare. And anyone that has run an audit off that will know that that's not the best way to do things. So I think GRC adds value in scalability as well. It allows us to do more with less resources, and that's going to allow organizations go from that small to the medium to the large along that whole life cycle of that company, at least in my opinion. So that is kind of an opinion there.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Shifting gears. Let me see here. Okay, we just talked about scaling. We talked about that as well. Okay, let me ask you this one. How can an automated GRC platform streamline compliance and risk management for businesses that handle complex regulatory compliance? You know, maybe they're in different business sectors. Maybe they're all across the world. Does that make a difference with your GRC platform that you're using?
The automation is Oh, sorry.
No, I was actually going to pick you, so go for it.
Oh, that's perfect. Well, the automation that you're talking about there is the value delivery in itself. Like,
Okay.
I think we all know, like, if we run an audit, right, then typically the way things might go is we have to go make a request of our engineers, auditors, developers, whatever the appropriate business unit is that's going to produce that piece of evidence. If we're automatically collecting it and we have that automation built in, then that's one less step we're doing. That's one less human intervention. But I think it also provides a certain level of assurance. When we collect these things automatically and we attach the IPE associated with it, or chain of custody for those not familiar with IPE, then we have an assurance that what we're providing is good and accurate, and it may not pass muster with the auditor because he might look at that and say, hey, there's a finding here, but that's good from my perspective. We don't want findings as an organization, right? It's terrible. We want to avoid them. But if we're in a non-satisfactory state, I want that someone to come in and say, hey, it doesn't look right to me, and give their professional opinion on it, have a discussion on it, and yeah, this is a legitimate finding or not a legitimate finding, right? So
Anybody want to add to that, or are you guys good?
Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was going to say, just again, double down on the centralizing of all the data that's coming in, everything that's coming in from all the different teams. And especially, like I said, if you can write different rules on the evidence that you're collecting. So if you have a certain level on this framework and you have a different one on this framework, being able to have that all in one place with the rules that apply to which frameworks, that saves a lot of time and energy. And that, to me, is how automation, at least, that's the way automation can help with complex regulatory frameworks.
Totally agree. Yep.
Yeah, I would just tagging onto that would be just the completeness of that. So, right, we always talk about the 2 lines of defense, but it's how does that common finding ultimately impact each line, and then how are we monitoring a pull through? So, great. So we can take insight to action and improve we can at least have identified the source of vulnerability. Then it's a matter of, are we following through on the remediation plan, or the mitigation and the remediation plan? How is it being monitored? How is it evaluated from an effectiveness perspective? And then ultimately, how are we building in that critical design and effectiveness testing through automation? So once something has been marked for that it met the requirements as outlined in the remediation plan, how are we immediately pressure testing the control as is? How are we making sure the evidence is writing through? And then how are we opening up and having that evidence flow all the way through internal audit, right? Internal audit, just like GRC, is not a necessary evil. They're a trusted advisor, and it's just a culture change we have to get over. No one is out to fire anyone by any means. And I know it's scary, and I know economic times are different, but the sooner we can start changing the narrative and looking at GRC and internal audit as necessary, transparent, trusted advisors, the better our products and the performance of what we have to offer will be. Because the half-life will be grossly improved when it comes to identification of risk, to mitigating such risk, to the gross maturity of control in a much more significant timeline. And that's impactful. That is data worth reporting on, not only to your regulators, but on the front page of your website for your advertising, which is, no one's perfect, but we're identifying and fixing things faster, and we know it's effective. That's great.
I like how you're employing the concept of trust but verify there, and I love that. That's very critical to us. Like, we take what our the workers, the people that are making the remediations, they're performing the work. We trust that they're doing things in good faith and that they're doing it in the way that they're supposed to be doing it. But we validate it as well, like, because trust only goes so far, and we could talk about different trust models and all that fun stuff. But let's just talk about the fact that, like, we're going to validate that the work that they performed is good work and that was done necessarily, and it fixed the underlying issue. That's what automation brings to the table, because there's no opinions on the matter. It is fact, right?
And I can't keep my mouth shut on this, but I feel like it will resonate with everyone out there, which is anyone who's been in GRC has been, I myself as a former frontline operator, how many times have you faced a conversation where you are talking to a control owner or a developer and you're saying, you must do this? And the response is, well, I don't get recognized, paid, or acknowledged for this work. And that's the key thing we have to underscore is how can we underscore the impact of the meaningful work they're doing? And I think that's where the pull through comes through for us, which is how can we help contextualize the impact, the gross impact of what they view as a, thankless or non-impactful critical task to us. And that's where we have to complete that loop.
Beautiful. And I think someone in chat actually said something along these lines, like, it's all about building champions across all functions versus holding cards and policing. They must feel they are part of the solution and not part of the problem. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Like, if the sort of like culture is that we're going to solve this problem together, that is a so much more powerful one than I'm closely holding my cards to my chest because I'm concerned that if I address this risk, it is somehow jeopardizing my position at the company. I don't think that's good for anyone or any professional.
Yeah. How do we change the state of looking as a controller as a technical leader rather than a technical liability holder?
Well said.
A lot of negative connotations in this industry, though. I mean, it's like the department of no, you're a cost center, that kind of stuff we talked about. It's like, we got to it's people. It's people doing jobs. Stop making somebody like they're the bad guy.
That some of the language that's used in regulatory and compliance speak is thick. It's not difficult to understand, and if you're not very familiar with those requirements, then it's like speaking Greek to a lot of people. And unless you speak Greek, then it's some other language. Okay, but the idea is that. We as professionals in the GRC space, that is our bread and butter, is to understand what that looks like. And then when we are going to those organizations or those units within our company to say, you must do this, this isn't coming out of like some personal vendetta that I'm trying to, enforce or enact. It's not even coming out of best practices. It's a requirement for us to do business in that space. Right? And so I think when we're all adopting that mentality of like, we're doing this together, we're working together, that's very, very powerful. So you're right, Casey. I don't know what the magic bullet is. I don't know what the answer is to say, changing mentalities and changing the way people think about things other than like constant value delivery. And I think that happens to change people's minds with the GRC space a lot when they start seeing the efficiencies that come out of it. They see how an audit went from taking a month to now maybe 3 weeks. Hey, that's a small incremental value, but value nevertheless, right? So I think that's how we do it, is value delivery. But I'm sure there's other methods and techniques out there as well.
You're one of those. It's funny you mentioned the Department of No. One of the first things I did when I got to anyone who doesn't know, I just tell them, I'm like, I'm not the Department of No. I'm the Department of No. KNOW. I just want to know what's going on. Just tell me. It's not a big deal if we're not perfect. Let me know where we are. I can explain that, and that's okay. So a lot of times people want that level 5, the perfection, and don't worry about it. I'm like, we'll get there. It's take that pressure.
I think that has to do with what I said earlier about like, hey, if I get a finding during the course of an audit, I'm okay with that. I want to have that discussion. That's an opportunity in my mind. So to your point.
Yeah.
Already positive. See, it's a challenge. You're turning it into an opportunity. See, you're already making strides, guys. This is awesome.
I'm a hopeless optimist. So
one last question, then we got to start wrapping up. I'm going to have you guys give either some homework, maybe a prediction or something. There's always discussion around enterprise risk. We brought it up earlier. We talked about what's reasonable, what's acceptable, things like that. But it's kind of hard to quantify until something goes wrong, right? So it's like you guys are, again, trying to get away from the negative stuff, but it's like you guys are only graded on stuff when it goes wrong. So how do we get away from that and put like a reasonable and acceptable metric to this critical function? Chris, what do you think?
Well, I know Josh has a lot to say on this. So I'm just going to say that my heart is near and dear to FAIR. So I'm going to leave it to him because I know this is his thing. So I say quantify it with FAIR or something similar. So take the floor from me, Josh.
Let's hear it.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Like when we quantify risk, there's a million different, okay, maybe not a million, but there's many different ways out there where we can quantify it. When there's, we can make calculations, we can base it on the magnitude of loss, magnitude of harm, we can do all those types of things. And those are all great because they're theoretical. And to your point, until we actually realize that loss, that we don't really know what it looks like. So I think, yes, it is important to quantify, but also keep in mind that it's very theoretical. And then we obviously should focus in on the causal factors for those risks and try to mitigate those as much as possible. Because if our risk is that we generically say there's a risk of an insider, so what mitigating factors are we implementing as an organization to prevent an insider from causing harm, right? The quantification of that risk is important, but the realization, I think, is much more dangerous and sort of dicey. So I don't know if I've strayed from the question there, but like, I love FAIR. I think it makes sense to me in my mind. I know a lot of organizations use it, but I'm not saying it's the one standard out there that everyone must use. I just think that it's important to keep in mind that that quantification is purely theoretical. So while it is a good guiding judgment on should I enact this remediation strategy or this remediation strategy, yeah, it can help in there, but it's best to draw from real world examples. Hopefully not from your organization, because that's always better when it happens to somebody else so we can learn from it. I don't know if I answered your question or if I just danced around it. I tend to do that when it comes to risk.
I feel like you answered it to me.
Awesome.
Casey,
Okay.
anything you might add? I mean, what are you thinking?
I'm so totally with you on the empirical approach. Big champion of FAIR, right? Or your classic risk equation of likelihood and by impact. But yeah, I think I'm going to go with the more qualitative approach here. So I think that part of the problem is the fact that we have silos that exist between our business owners, and those are responsible for bringing and offering to market versus those who are building and governing it. And we need to marry the interests. So I think an initial conception of what a go-to-market motion is, we're going to have a business leader, and we need to have a GRC professional that's or a leader that is a partner that's engaged at that stage. Because one of the fundamental risks to bringing that product to market should be the risk associated with what if it goes wrong. What if the data governance goes wrong? Or right, the easiest thing is what if someone potentially plausibly has access to something, whether it's intended or not, that ultimately undermines the integrity of the overall offering, in simplest terms, or confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And that's just one part of the equation now. The thing that everyone's paying attention to now that is our new prisoners matrix is we have two triads. So we have the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which is our traditional security lens. And then we have the reliability, which is the triad, which is the durability, the durability, immutability, and ephemerality also. And security and resilience is on a teeter-totter. There's a delicate balance that's appropriate to strike for each and every intended use. So bring GRC to the conceptualization and initial thought process behind a go-to-market motion, and start bringing a number to the risk it presents to your the efficacy of your business from the get-go, not post-mortem once audit says so. And that way it will always be embedded or integrated into your continuous evaluation of what you're bringing to market. That's my opinion. And then the numbers should flow.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Let's see. I might change my mind on what I want you guys to kind of wrap up with, if you don't mind. I'm looking at the question that we had from the topic. It's GRC reporting, how and why you should improve yours. We talked a bit about the how, but as we close out, if you guys wouldn't mind, let's do a why. We talked about why, but we didn't really specifically say this is why. So let's do everybody. We'll just do the order on the screen. Josh, why should folks be improving GRC as we close out?
Because it gives you operational insight to your security status, compliance status, blah, blah, all of those things that we just talked about. It gives unprecedented insights into that. Simple answer.
I like it. I like it. Casey.
Yeah. I think the magic word that comes to mind is speed, right? We're moving faster than the speed of light, and it's impossible to catch up. And if you're behind the curve, it's really hard to catch up. And if we don't start prioritizing this now, it's going to be really hard to start answering questions that everyone will be expected to. So when you look at the cyber liability space, premiums are going up. More institutions are becoming self-insured, right? We're seeing that impact to the home ownership space, right? Just from a consumer product perspective. If you don't build this in by a structured and standardized framework and make it part of your core decision-making process proactively, it's going to be very hard to justify or continuously and effectively evaluate the future direction of your company. So you need to invest in this now in order to capture the appropriate empirical data to justify your existence. So not a negative, but I think it's actually bringing attention to something that we've been screaming until we're blue in the face about.
Right. Excellent. Chris, I'm going to switch yours up just a smidge, just because at the beginning you talked about being at 83%. Give me that. Give us that number, and I feel like that's an important thing as we talk about the why people should be doing this. So if you wouldn't mind, kind of shift yours into that frame of mind and give us your final thought.
Well, my final thought is 83% represents a lot more than just a number out of 100%. You are reducing silos. You are streamlining workflows. You are improving risk management. You are staying current, and you are enhancing collaboration through that. So if you're interested in those things and you want to reduce costs, what other reasons could you need? Automate your GRC today. It's the best why. You're going to get a huge return on your investment there.
And if you're lucky, you'll actually recapture time. And ultimately, it's like you're getting an extra employee, is what I'm hearing from folks.
It's the most valuable thing any of us have is time.
Right. It's all we got.
Yeah.
It's all we got. Might be man-made construct, but that's all we've got. So. Thank you, guys. Appreciate that. Let's see here. I got to wrap us up here, but thank you, guys. Awesome job. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to be here today and answering my questions. We got a bunch of good ones from the audience as well. So thank you, guys, everybody out there in the audience. Thank you to Anecdotes for making this session possible. We've got more remote session stuff on the way. You can see the one with the check mark. We just did that one today. We're going to banish the boogeyman next week on the 17th, apparently. We're going to be talking about assessing AI risk, talking about risk. We touched on that a very brief amount today. Then we're going to talk Ask a Lawyer. That's on the 30th. I've got our 3 cyber attorneys bringing back Violet, Jordan, and Mariah for that panel. And then we've got Cybersecurity, a Balancing Act, the CISO perspective. That's on Halloween. I'm going to try to scare people with that one. But seriously, we have a good group on that panel as well. And then, of course, we got a bunch of stuff coming up in November as well. So plus our in-person events. So check out the resource tab. I've got all those loaded in there. You can actually sign up for any or all of those at the same time. That's what I like about this platform. But that concludes our time together. If you haven't already, grab your CPE certificate. That's down there on the widget bar for you. Otherwise, we'll see you on the 17th for the boogeyman topic. But thank you again to the folks over at Anecdotes for putting this one together for us. Thank you, Casey, Chris, and Josh for joining me as well. And everybody out there in the audience, thank you. Till next time, be safe, everybody out there. And if you do go to our events, the in-person events, we've got cool, wrong side, cool swag pins, Cyber Hero. I think, honestly, all of you guys out there, if you're out there fighting the good fight like everybody on this call, thank you. You guys are cyber heroes in my book. So that concludes our time together. GRC reporting, how and why you should improve yours. If you didn't catch it, rewind and listen to what Chris said again. That's why you want to improve yours. So we'll see everybody on the 17th. Take care.